I'll be waiting for you at the hotel. I'll be waiting in the lobby. As I finished reading, I noticed Leslie refilling her glass at the kitchen island. Are you okay? She asked. I'll be fine, I replied. She nodded and returned with a bottle and a full glass. Sitting down next to me, she refilled my glass and looked at me with her doe eyes. Right, Rick? What are we going to do? Rick looked at the letter again. Suddenly, everything had a clarity that he had not felt for several days. His mind cleared, decisions began to form, and the look in his eyes changed. He looked at Leslie. She noticed a change in his face. She felt a little fear from his gaze. Leslie, I'll tell you what you need to do. You go home and tell Vincent that I appreciate the offer, but I don't agree. I will not allow myself to be bought by my wife, turning our friends into prostitutes. Rick noticed a flash of anger in Leslie's eyes. Do you think that I am a girl of easy virtue? I didn't say that. I said my wife was taking advantage of our friends. You are a beautiful woman, sexy and desirable. But I think Marcy is trying to create a situation where she can take away my moral basis for objecting to her actions. I won't play this game. At least for now. I finished with the first smile on my face in days. This seemed to calm Leslie, and she stood up. I let her lean in and kiss me on the lips. Rick, I'm sorry. I didn't know what she was doing or how she was doing it. I thought everything was agreed upon in advance. Please don't hold it against me or Vinny. I don't hold it. She played you and Vincent like a Stradivarius. She's trying to manipulate us all. I don't think she understands what she's playing with and what the consequences might be. Leslie listened, and again I saw a hint of fear in her eyes. You won't do anything that could get you into trouble, will you? I thought about it. Since I didn't have a clear plan yet, I could answer honestly. At the moment, I have no plans to do anything. She smiled and kissed me again before running out the door and heading home. I got up, went to my office, and grabbed a legal pad and pencil. Returning to the kitchen, I brewed some strong coffee, sat down at the table, and carefully placed my notebook and pencil in front of me. I also brought a manila folder. I collected the letter Marcy had sent with Leslie, dated it, and made a few notes in the margins. He carefully placed it in a folder and closed it. Earlier, when I looked at the letter a second time, for some reason, anger, disappointment, and depression suddenly changed. I think mental trauma pushed me into old habits and methods. Anger suddenly turned into desire. Frustration became determination. Depression turned into a desire to act and take revenge. The coffee was almost ready. I was in full analytical mode. This is what I do. I take facts, assumptions, and my intuition to create an analysis and then formulate solutions. I needed to find out exactly what was going on and who the players were in this farcical absurdity. As Sun Tzu said, to know your enemy, you must become your enemy. I was going to learn everything I could about my enemy. I spent the rest of the night at the computer. Halfway through my research, a thought occurred to me. I remembered reading some of the materials the hospital sent home about the program and the trip. They advised employees to leave their electronic devices at home, as they were easy targets for thieves and would likely not work anyway. I went into the office where Marcy often worked from home, and sure enough, I found her laptop and phone locked in a drawer. This explained why she didn't answer calls or messages. I opened the laptop and in less than 5 minutes turned it on and started guessing the password. After another 5 minutes, I bypassed the security system and logged into the computer. It's amazing how habitual most people are. She continued to use our anniversary date as a password on all devices, which made things much easier for me. I didn't install any spyware. There was no need for this. I had everything I could need for a divorce. The question was settled. After viewing her history, I started downloading all messages, emails, contents of all files, photos, and browser history. I found a link to cloud storage and committed it. I can do the hacking later. After I copied the contents of her laptop, it was the phone's turn. I repeated the process, storing everything on a secure cloud server. Once finished, I returned both devices to their place. I sat down in my chair and leaned back. I was going to sit down and think about everything logically and analytically. Unfortunately, my mind was in a different mood, and I woke up at almost 7 a.m. I made some coffee, looked at my notes, and stretched. I was quickly falling back into the routine that I thought I had banished from my system. I was back in combat mode. After a hot shower and a change of clothes, I made breakfast, poured myself more coffee, and sat down at the kitchen table to prioritize my activities. The first step was to find out more about Dr. Trey. I didn't want to take the time to do this kind of research on my own because I had other things to do. But I've had people who are good at these things. I was about to call, but stopped halfway and looked at my cell phone. I realized that I was as guilty as my goals. I threw my cell phone on the table like a grenade. I took my everyday pocket kit and keys. I didn't think Marcy and her lover would follow me from Colombia. However, I didn't want anyone else to be able to see my footprints in the digital sand. I was pretty sure that what I had in mind would not be entirely legal, even if I thought it was justified. A quick trip around town brought me home with a new laptop, a new phone with prepaid minutes, and a small radio receiver that is quite useful for finding anything that emits a radio signal like bugs, video cameras, etc. My first task as soon as I got home was to search the house for such devices. To my surprise, the house was clean. Apparently, my loving wife was so confident in my trust that she did not consider it necessary to follow me to find out what I was going to do. Her blissful ignorance was pleasant. It would make my plan easier. I was at war. I have assigned one of our analysts to compile a complete dossier on Dr. Trey for me with instructions to do so as soon as possible. I also talked to my boss and brought him up to speed on what was going on. He would have found out anyway, and I decided it would be better to bring him up to date as early as possible. I maintained my security clearance when I retired from the military, and they were important to my current job. He understood, having himself experienced 2 divorces during his service. He warned me against overreacting, knowing the damage such a response could cause. I assured him that I was planning a tactical response, not a strategic option. He let me go with carte blanche to use company resources as needed. That afternoon, I was at my lawyer's office. He was not a divorce lawyer, but I figured that as one of the best civil lawyers in the state, he knew the best divorce lawyer in the area. He understood, being another veteran with personal experience. In less than 20 minutes, he gave me a complete list of steps to take to protect my assets and a list of the top 10 divorce lawyers in town. I used the phone in his office to make the first call and had an appointment with Angela Foster the next day. She was number 1 on my lawyer's list. I spent the rest of the day completing some of the items on my new to-do list. By the end of the day, I had done everything except 1 or 2 items. Suffice to say, I have planted a veritable time bomb in our personal, financial, and professional lives. Returning home from a stop for Chinese takeout, I sat in the kitchen, studying my lists and notes, munching on spring rolls, and sipping a cold beer. I hadn't received a report on Dr. Trey in a few days, so I decided to spend time sorting through the information I'd gathered from Marcy's laptop and phone. I learned that she was even more of a fool than I thought. Based on the emails and messages I found on her phone and laptop, this trip to Colombia was simply the latest in a long line of hospital-sponsored excursions, and that it was common knowledge, although not officially acknowledged, that participants on such trips routinely engaged in extramarital affairs between themselves. It wasn't explicitly approved, but it was clear from emails between Marcy, the head of human resources, the vice president in charge of travel, and the hospital's CEO that they all knew what was going on. This gave the situation a completely new flavor. It was clear that this was a planned action and that the hospital administration was in cahoots. I typed out enough emails and messages and put them in a folder. I put away the remains of dinner, opened another beer, and turned on the TV. Imagine my surprise when the evening news at 10 o'clock showed a major story about a great humanitarian effort in Colombia by a team from a local hospital. And there on the screen was the great Dr. Trey making pompous speeches about the wonderful work they were doing. I watched, feeling a growing anger, which quickly gave way to nausea. I had to run from my chair to the downstairs bathroom to get rid of the beer and Chinese food in my stomach. Returning to my chair, I turned off the TV and the lights. I spent the rest of the night stretched out in a chair. I think I fell asleep at some point. It became clear that it would be a long 6 weeks. A couple of days later, when I arrived at work, there was a thick manila folder lying on my desk. I recognized the handwriting of one of my analysts, Samantha Pascal, on the cover. It only said, Carjusa, Trey Michael, Maryland. I carefully opened the large envelope and laid out a stack of documents on the table. I started on the first page and quickly skimmed through the documents, looking for the main points. I wasn't too surprised by what I found. Dr. Trey Carjusa was a serial adulterer. Since becoming one of the leading surgeons in his field, he has moved from one hospital to another. It was not exactly the career one would expect from the eminent surgeon, especially if his own advertising is to be believed. Sam discovered a consistent pattern of chaos and destruction: 3 broken marriages at a New York hospital, multiple lawsuits, and a divorce from the wife of the hospital board chairman. I was amazed that this guy could even find a job, let alone keep his license. I put all the documents back into the envelope, twisted the string around the button, and locked it in my fireproof cabinet. I left my office, poured myself a cup of coffee, and slowly walked down the hallway. I looked into Sam's office. She looked up and smiled at me. "Did you receive my package?" "Yes. Can you add Dr. Trey's financial information to the package? I thought you would need this." "I will have everything I need by that day. The security of bank computers is now much stricter." I nodded and returned to my office. With the information I had from Marcy's laptop and phone, there was no need to spend time or money getting any additional information. Hiring a private investigator in Colombia was almost impossible. I decided to focus on preparing for the final day of reckoning, which would come in less than 4 weeks. I had a team of security analysts, hackers, and my bulldog lawyer working hard on it. Everything started to fall into place. I did the usual division of marital property as my lawyer advised. The only change I made was to transfer all the money to an offshore account in the Cayman Islands and a Swiss bank. Most of the funds in this account came from selling my share of our business to my partner. Now I was nothing more than an employee and with a much lower salary. Deciding that I could no longer stay in our house, I prepaid the mortgage for 3 months and moved out. While I was packing my things in the car, Vincent came around the corner of the garage. I stopped and looked at him. I didn't offer to shake his hand. "Are you moving?" To him. "Are you going to sell this place?" "No. I'll leave it to Marcy. If she can pay the mortgage, let her pay it. Or she can sell it. Since I refinanced and took out all the capital, she won't get much anyway. This is quite cruel." I stopped what I was doing and looked at Vincent. Unlike some people, my wedding vows meant something to me. Even after I found out what was happening, I still believed in what I promised her. "When this divorce is finalized, then I will think about other options." Vincent's face turned cold. "Leslie and I have an understanding." "I know. I understand that you don't care that your wife fucks other men, and she doesn't care that you fuck other women. How does it work for you? How many men did she have in her bed besides you? How many do you know about? What about the rest? This applies to you too. The fact that you and Leslie both helped Marcy pull off this crazy scheme behind my back doesn't make you any more believable or trustworthy in my eyes. You both should have understood that I would never agree to use Leslie to heal my wounded sense of self-worth. But you have already changed, Marcy told us. You are right, and so it was. In Afghanistan, 4 of us soldiers were thrown from our Humvee by an improvised device explosion. 2 of them died instantly. Another one, Dieter Kyle, and I found ourselves in a dilapidated hut under fire, which did not allow us to go outside. We almost died. Only suppressive fire from a couple of Black Hawk helicopters kept the militants from getting close to us. We kissed, she gave me pleasure, and I answered her in kind. As soon as I finished, one of the helicopters was able to land a few meters away from us. We got ready and ran to the helicopter. The entire episode lasted only 15 minutes. It was a pathetic incident, but under the circumstances, I don't think you or anyone else would call it an affair. Marcy had been having sex with that scumbag doctor for at least 6 months on a regular basis. If it was revenge, then I'm sure she tipped the scales heavily in her favor. She may claim that it's because of what I did, but that doesn't make sense. No, she made a conscious decision. She lied to me. She lied to you and Leslie. She even lied to her children. The only people she hasn't lied to are the other scumbag doctors and nurses she's with. I'm sorry you and Leslie got into this, but you're no better than Marcy in my eyes. If you were not seriously morally compromised, you would understand that this would be a blow to me and our family. This puts you in the center of the culprit circle. Now I need to continue packing. I turned away and went into the house for another box of my things. When I came out, Vincent was no longer there. I never saw him or Leslie again. I moved to a much smaller condominium closer to our offices. My idea was to leave Marcy this monstrous house. She wanted him from the beginning, now let him be hers. Her BMW, which was parked at the airport, was leased through my company. When I sold my share to my partners, I asked them to cancel the lease on both cars. I bought an old 15-year-old pickup truck with four-wheel drive. It was quite shabby and suited my style better. I never liked driving that Infiniti. The leasing company picked up both vehicles using a tow truck. I left a few $1,000s in a joint bank account and a working debit card. I thought that this would be enough for her until she returned. Maybe Cardozo will pay her entertainment expenses. After all, he amuses her anyway. Once I had my affairs in order, I turned my attention to Dr. Trey. I had mixed feelings when I learned that this scoundrel had a wife and 3 little boys. I was going to destroy their world, and I was sorry. I wondered how to approach this as delicately as possible. And then I had an idea. Why not make Mrs. Dr. Trey an ignorant accomplice and help her take revenge? I think she will need this. A few days later, Sam walked into my office. She closed the door, which was unusual, and sat down opposite me at the table. Sam was attractive, but not the kind of woman that guys go crazy for. I don't hire people based on their appearance. I hire people who can think, and Sam could do that. She looked at me, and I saw hidden anger in her eyes. This Cardoza is a complete bastard. Why don't you tell me what you really think? This calmed the situation a little. She smiled and threw a few more sheets of paper onto my desk. He not only cheats on his wife, but also cheats on taxes. He spied money from a charity. This money is not going to any bank that we can find. He must be transferring it to an offshore account. Can we find this account? It's difficult, unless you break into his computer. Ugh, you're not asking for much, are you? She looked at me and shrugged. We sat there thinking, and after a minute, we threw a few ideas into the trash. Then I had a thought that made me chuckle. You know, sometimes the best way to attack is a flanking maneuver. Sam looked at me, puzzled. How likely do you think it is that a wife with 2 children doesn't know what this bastard is doing? Unless she's a complete fool, I'd say she knows perfectly well. Why didn't she do anything? What is the strongest instinct of a woman with children? Child protection. I believe she decided that the best thing she could do for her children was maintain the status quo. She will take care of her children first and thinks that if she rocks the boat, it will affect the well-being of her children. Logical. What are you planning? I think if she sees a way to use her husband and come out victorious, she might want to help a little. Sam looked at me suspiciously. Won't this land you in jail? Of course not. Think about this. If he has money offshore, chances are no one in the US knows about it. If he's hiding money for some reason, he won't be able to make a fuss if something happens to that money, right? Sam's eyes narrowed almost to slits. This will require, well, behind-the-scenes work. A little, not too much. She stood up. I think this is a good place to end this conversation. I'm not sure I want to know more about this. The right decision. She quickly left, and I opened the package with financial documents and began to study them. When I arrived at Cardoza's house, it was, by most people's definition, a mansion. Quite suitable for a famous surgeon. I parked my beat-up old car in the roundabout driveway. People passing by might mistake me for a gardener or a guy cleaning the pool. Since I was wearing jeans and a fishing shirt and probably looked like one of the hired workers, I rang the bell and stepped back from the front door. A few seconds later, the door was opened by a short blonde. She had a baby in her arms. Two more small faces peeked out from behind her. She looked slightly puzzled, apparently not expecting to see me at her door. "Mrs. Cardoza?" "Yes, my name is Rick Weston." "How can I help you, Mr. Weston?" I took a deep breath before continuing. "Mrs. Cardoza, you and I have something in common, and I think we need to talk about it." She looked even more puzzled. "And what is this? Have we met before?" I decided there was no point in beating around the bush. The children were still young enough to not understand much of our conversation. "Mrs. Cardoza, right now your husband and my wife are sleeping together in Colombia. She's a nurse, and she and your husband have been having a secret affair for at least the last 6 months." I saw her eyes change, and she suddenly opened the glass door. The growl I heard from her sounded truly threatening. "This son of a bitch is at it again. I told him last time that I would hang his balls on my rearview mirror if he did it again. Come on in, we need to talk." I followed her as she walked deeper into the luxurious home. As she walked, she shouted to someone, "Consuela, take the children to the playroom and stay with them there. I need to talk to this man." A plump Hispanic woman appeared, wiping her hands on her apron. She smiled, gathered the 3 children, and hurried to take them deeper into the house. The petite blonde turned on her heel and looked at me. "You said your name is Rick?" "Yes, ma'am." "No need, ma'am. My name is Claudia. My friends call me Sissy. You can call me the same. Sit down and tell us what you know." We sat at the coffee table on furniture that probably cost more than everything I owned combined. I explained how my wife left and showed her some of the information from the private investigator confirming that Marcy and Cardoza had slept together at least 6 months ago. I told her about Marcy leaving and about my call to Colombia. Sissy sat with a straight face, listening to me. When I finished, she spoke quietly but very intensely. "That bastard did it at least 3 times. The first 2 times I gave him a chance, wanting to save the family. The 3rd time I put everything in its place. If he does it again, I will end things with him and set my father's lawyer on him. I met Trey when he was still a student. We got married after he graduated and started medical school. My parents weren't happy, but I was head over heels in love. Dad insisted on a marriage contract. I listened. I was pretty sure I liked her father. I have photographs, videos, and audio recordings if you need them. There's something else. I'm pretty sure your husband took money from Doctors Without Borders. He appears to be hiding it in offshore accounts and is probably hiding the money from you too. This bastard. Yes, I receive a payment from the trust fund quarterly. That works out to about $250,000 per quarter. Trey said he's investing in it in the future. Can you get records of all your personal finances? Certainly. But how do I know what else he has? Can you get the tax returns for the last couple of years? I think yes. We use the same accountant as my father. Perhaps we can find some of this. Cease looked at me. Why are you doing this? Honestly, I want to burn them both, but I didn't want you and your children to become collateral damage. I wanted to warn you so you can start making the necessary preparations. Cease looked at me critically. Would you meet my father? I suppose so. But we need to act quickly. I want it all to be collected before they get home. Agree. Let me make some calls. Can you wait? Certainly. Can I use your bathroom? She smiled. This smile was unlike any I had seen before. Her eyes sparkled and dimples appeared at the corners of her mouth. Along the corridor, first door on the right. I stood up and headed towards the toilet. She was already dialing the number on her mobile. It was almost sunset. I was still in Cardoza's mansion, and Sissy Cardoza spent most of the time on her cell phone. I tried my best not to eavesdrop, but it was difficult since she was sitting across from me at the table on the pool deck. The 2 older children splashed happily in the pool. The baby stood in the playpen, holding on to its edge and looking at me intently, as if I were some kind of strange creature. I think she was completely absorbed by the fact that there was a man in the house. Apparently, Dr. Trey Cardoza was not a big fan of family life. I knew Cease called her dad first. She explained to him what I told her and then what I asked for. When she invited her father to come in the evening, she smiled widely and nodded animatedly. A few more calls, and she asked her private investigator to deliver everything they had collected. Obviously, Mrs. Cardoza already knew that Dr. Trey was busy with something outside of his medical practice. I heard footsteps along the tiled corridor. They were heavy and fast. I stood waiting and watched as a man entered the house. The two boys in the pool jumped towards the figure and jumped into his arms. His tanned face with rough features shone with joy as he hugged two laughing boys, still wet from the water. Sissy walked up on tiptoes and kissed him on the cheek. The baby hooted happily and soon found herself in the general pile. The man was not very large, perhaps about 5 feet 9 inches tall, weighing about 200 pounds, and in good shape. He could have been between 45 and 90 years old. I waited patiently while family matters were resolved. Soon he looked at me without saying a word. Cease introduced us. Dad, this is Rick Weston. Rick, this is my father, Daniel Forrester. I told him what you told me. I thought you two should meet and talk. The man came up to me. He was almost a head shorter than me and probably 50 pounds lighter, but when he shook my hand, I had to do my best to resist his grip. We stood there for a few seconds, tensing our forearms, trying to outdo each other. Finally, he loosened his grip and smiled. Mr. Weston, my name is Daniel Forrester. Sissy is my only child. I think you understand my concern for her well-being. However, she is a stubborn and willful girl. She always goes her own way. May I ask how you ended up in this situation? Cease intervened. You two sit down. I'll go get some beer and tell Consuela to cook something for dinner. We sat down at the table. Daniel Forrester was waiting. I realized that he was waiting for me to speak. For some reason, I told him the whole story, starting with my time in Afghanistan and the incident with Didri. He nodded, and it didn't seem to surprise him at all. I brought him up to the latest events. I'm usually not a big fan of going into that much detail during a first meeting, even with my clients. Interesting. What do you think caused all this? I shrugged. Revenge, retribution, boredom. It doesn't bother me too much, although I am curious. My main concern is the flippant approach she has taken. The complete disrespect she showed me tells me she doesn't care anymore. I realized what I said and looked around. The children were not at the pool. I smiled shyly and apologized. He nodded. Were you a helicopter pilot? I nodded. Black Hawks. 2 tours in hot spots, a year in Korea. Why did you resign? I was going to return to the States. I knew something was wrong at home, and I wanted to go back to try to fix it. He transferred to intelligence and spent another 18 months in the reserves. Once I had enough points, I retired and joined a veteran-owned security company. I sold my share of the company back to the other LLC members because I didn't want to drag them into a messy scam. Sissy's father looked at me. We're in Afghanistan. Wherever we have been. We were everywhere. Kamdesh? Yes. I have flown many missions to Kamdesh. I was the deputy base commander in Keating. You guys saved our asses. I looked at Daniel again. It was hellishly difficult. Yes. I didn't tell him that one of those flights earned me the Distinguished Service Cross. So, what do you plan to do about this situation? You asked Sissy for tax returns and a lot of financial information. Cease showed up with a beer. I'm pretty sure she was standing right outside the door to the pool area, listening. She was smart enough to let the 2 old warriors deal with each other. I think the good doctor is laundering money from Doctors Without Borders. Cease, sorry, your daughter mentioned that she receives quarterly trust fund payments and Trey invests them. I suspect he is making the money disappear. I intend to rain fire and brimstone on my wife and your son-in-law. When I found out that he was married and had children, I changed my mind because I didn't want your daughter or your grandchildren to become random victims. Daniel Forrester looked at me again. Did you put your plans on hold because you were worried about Cease and the kids? Yes, sir. You are a strange man, Weston. You seem so calm and collected despite it all. You clearly have a plan that will cause a lot of damage, and you don't seem particularly concerned about it, but you stop to think about some strange woman and her children. Why, sir, I don't mind hurting anyone who deserves it. But I've seen too much destruction that affects the innocent when the damage goes beyond the pale. I don't want to be a part of this. I will find another way to solve my problems. I don't want to be part of the destruction of the family. Daniel opened a long-neck bottle of beer and drank half of it in one gulp. I took a sip of mine. I didn't want to get drunk and then have to deal with that too. Rick, can I call you Rick? You can call me Daniel. I appreciate your concern for the well-being of Cease and her children. I appreciate you meeting with me to discuss your concerns and your thoughts. I know this military philosophy. She allowed me to build a good organization. Daniel downed his beer in one gulp. I've been following the idiot's adventures for several years now. Even Sissy doesn't know some of what you're about to learn. I've never been a big fan of Dr. Asshole. Everything finally became clear when he started his first affair less than a year after their wedding. Cease was pregnant, and I refrained from raising the issue, since she was confident that she could reason with him and start a family. We hushed up the problems, and I had a serious conversation with Dr. Durmer. This has become a more regular scenario in recent years. He almost lost his license several times. I must admit, he is a brilliant and talented surgeon. He saved many people. All this only fueled his narcissistic ego and strengthened his belief in his divinity. Sissy is tired of this. She has children and is tired of heartache and betrayal. I think finally she will listen to her father and get rid of this useless rag. I looked at Cease to gauge her reaction to her father's words and language. She didn't blink an eye, except when she opened the beer and it hissed, sending a drop of foam into her eye. Damn it, she grabbed a napkin and dabbed her eyes. Daniel laughed. Tell me, Rick, what's your plan? If everything works out, there will be no survivors this time. They will both lose their licenses, their jobs, everything they own, and all their friends and family. It's tough. Why not just leave and end it all? You have made it clear that he is a serial cheater and appears to prey on married women. If I can stop it, it will end. When all is said and done, he will no longer be able to seduce married women. I see this as a gift to society. As for my wife, she proved that she did it on purpose. This was planned. She clearly doesn't give a damn, excuse my French, about me or this marriage. You came here for a reason. Why? I wanted to give your daughter a chance to get her act together to save as much as she wants to protect. I'm almost sure that he will fight to the last to hold on to everything he can. He will turn his anger on her. His type never blames himself. Daniel nodded. He got up and brought 2 more bottles of beer. Sissy looked at him. Damn it, Dad. Where is mine? Sorry. I tried not to laugh. I was beginning to realize that Sissy Cardoza was a lot like her father. Daniel opened his bottle and then looked at me. How will it affect your plans if I tell you that Sissy is protected as much as possible? Trey signed the prenuptial agreement. In case of betrayal, he receives only $100,000, his car, and what he can carry. He is so confident that he thinks he will bypass this contract and take half of everything Cease has, including the children. Nothing would make my heart happier than to see it destroyed. Do you think you can do this? I think yes. The biggest stumbling block is the money he hides abroad. I have no way to easily find them, let alone get to them. I was hoping to get some information about where this money was coming from and where it was going. Daniel looked at Cease. She shrugged. It seemed we had reached a dead end again. And then I remembered the recommendation from the organization not to take laptops and other electronic devices with me. Did your husband leave his laptop and mobile phone here? Sissy thought for a moment. I really don't know. We could look in the office. She stood up and walked deeper into the house, and Daniel and I followed. I watched as she stopped when she put her hand on the door handle and found it locked. Her expression changed from almost neutral to angry in a split second. That idiot never locks his doors. I wonder what's going on here. I don't have the key. Do you mind? She walked away from the door, and I pulled my small set of lockpicks from the pocket of my tactical pants. Not even 4 or 5 seconds had passed before the doorknob turned. I stepped back and Cease and Daniel looked on with expressions of amazement. I put the set of master keys in my pocket. Daniel spoke as he walked past me into the office. Helicopter pilot. For the last 3 years, Army intelligence. He nodded and smiled. Once inside, Cease went straight to Cardoza's desk. The laptop was on the table. His cell phone was charging on a credenza behind the table. She opened her laptop and immediately frowned. It is password protected. I have no idea what the password could be. I nodded. This didn't surprise me at all. I hesitated when I made my next proposal. Do you mind if I take my computer and mobile phone with me? I have a very modern laboratory and several excellent technicians. I saw Cease look at her father. He nodded almost imperceptibly. She collected the computer and phone and handed them to me. I reached out to both of them. Thank you for the meeting and help. Let me deliver this to my office. I'll return them here tomorrow. I'll be happy to share with you everything I find. I thought Cease was going to hug me. She took a timid step towards me, but then retreated, looking at her father. I extended my hand to Daniel. He grabbed her, and we felt each other's grip again. I wasn't sure I won. Rick, here is my business card with my personal mobile number. Please keep me updated on everything that is happening and what you are willing to share. Absolutely, sir. I left and headed back to the office. The technicians had already gone home by that time. I sat down, plugged in Trey's laptop, and started going through the most obvious things people use for passwords, but nothing obvious worked. I leaned back from the table and took a deep breath. I'll have to be patient and let the experts handle it in the morning. Just after lunch, the next day, I received a call from our laboratory. Geeks hacked both the laptop and the phone. I checked my secure internal system and found the folder in my cloud storage. Within seconds, I was already looking at some very interesting information. After a few hours, I had a general idea of the situation. Cardoza was indeed busy. She had at least 5 offshore accounts scattered across different banks and countries. Without delving into the accounts, I can say with certainty that he had almost $15 million in cash in reserve. I also wondered if I could track the quarterly payments from the trust fund, and it didn't take long for me to find an account in Venezuela that regularly received a solid deposit of $250,000 every 3 months. I picked up the phone, pulled out Daniel's card, and dialed the number. Daniel, Rick, do you have a minute? Moment. Can I call you back? Certainly. Almost 5 minutes had passed when my cell phone rang. The caller ID showed a number I didn't recognize. I answered and heard Daniel's voice. Rick, this is Daniel. Sorry for the delay. I decided it was better to use a secure phone. I smiled. Understand. No problem. Can we meet tomorrow? It was already quite late, and I didn't want to be a bother. Can you come over tonight? I know you're running out of deadlines. Certainly. Where and when? Let me make one more call, and I'll call you back. Fine. The phone went silent. I looked at the papers on my desk, rearranged them carefully, and placed them in a secure folder. My notes were in my head. As I was closing and locking the secure filing cabinet, my phone rang again, and I recognized the number as Daniel's. Weston. Rick, can you come to Sissy's house? She is alone, the children are sleeping, and I think that she should also participate in this discussion. No problem. I'll be there in 20 minutes. Meet me there. The journey took a little longer due to an accident on the highway. I pulled into the curved driveway. I saw a Range Rover parked. I remembered him from yesterday when I left. The door opened, and I saw Daniel and Cease waiting. Once I was inside, we headed to the cozy living room. Cease asked if we would like something to drink. I refused, but Daniel asked for some Scotch tape. Once that was done, I began to give them a brief overview of what I had discovered. The more I spoke, the more I felt Daniel's anger increase. When I finished my brief introduction, Daniel took a long sip of Scotch, set the glass down, and leaned forward slightly. This son of a bitch stole from my daughter, and from a non-profit organization to hide money. He knows that if we activate the prenuptial agreement, not only will he get nothing, but I will demand back the loan I gave him to open a practice after graduation. The only pity is that we cannot withdraw this money from these accounts. I smiled. Well, I'm pretty sure we have not only account information, but also usernames and passwords. He is a meticulous accountant. I'm pretty sure he has all these accounts cataloged with usernames and passwords. He thinks this file is protected. I don't think he took into account that someone with the resources I have would be looking at these files. Daniel frowned. Will this be legal? Well, let's put it this way. Since this is a community property state and his wife has access to the house, office, and his electronics, she has a right to know what he does and what the state of their finances is. I also assume that, like everyone else on that trip, he left power of attorney in his wife's name. This should ease legal issues. Daniel smiled. I like the way you think. Do you have any suggestions? Eat. I see no reason why Cease shouldn't open a couple of offshore accounts in her name. Once that was done, she could easily transfer all of those funds into her account, leaving just enough in there to keep them active. I looked at Sissy. I also advise you to find the toughest divorce lawyer you can find. I'll give you the name of my lawyer if you want. He will give you a list of things to do to prepare. I will tell you both that I am approaching this situation with a scorched earth approach. I'm going to leave them both with nothing. Daniel seemed intrigued by the idea. Cease looked a little worried. Daniel spoke first. Yes, give us the name of your lawyer. What do you mean by scorched earth tactics? I laughed. Well, the first thing I did was spend the money to make an agreement with every divorce lawyer I could find who had any reputation. My wife will have a hell of a time finding anyone other than the worst lawyer in the area to take her case. She would have to travel at least 100 miles to find anyone who would have even the slightest chance of success. You are taking extreme measures. Hell yes. I looked at Sissy. Pardon my language. She nodded and smiled. I grew up in the army. I don't think you can come up with expressions that I haven't heard many times. I nodded. I'll give you all the details in the morning. Cease looked at her father, nodding at the same time. Could you help me with this? I'm pretty good with computers, but this is beyond my scope. I glanced at Daniel and again noticed an almost imperceptible nod. Certainly. When everything is ready, I will call you and we will meet. She noticeably cheered up. I got up. I need to go back to the office and work on this tonight. Daniel stood up and walked over to me. He spoke quietly in a voice that I recognized from years of military service. Take care of my daughter. If you need anything, call me. Yes, sir. I worked until almost 6 a.m. the next day. It reminded me of a time when a mission in the military required complete dedication to complete. The main difference, instead of dealing with information that could mean safety for the men going into battle, this time I set out to destroy 2 lives that had treated me horribly unfairly. I must admit, the satisfaction was almost the same. I headed back to my apartment to shower and change. I went to a local diner and had a hearty breakfast. While I was enjoying a cup of freshly brewed coffee, I called Cease. Good morning. Can we meet and talk? Certainly. Did you have breakfast? Just finished. Thank you. Then come right now. It took me about 20 minutes to get there. The front door opened just as I was about to ring the bell. Consuela smiled when I entered. Good morning, sir. The Sonora is in the office. I smiled at the smiling Hispanic woman and said, Buenos dias, Consuela. Gracias. Is there coffee? Consuela smiled brightly at me. Yes, senor. I headed to the office. Cease was sitting at a card table in the corner of the room. Seeing me, she jumped to her feet. I was amazed when she put her arms around my neck and hugged me tightly. Then she took my hand and pulled me towards the table. It was a folding card table. I noticed a large puzzle box on the floor nearby. Are you a fan of puzzles? I collect them so I don't go crazy. You don't know what it's like to be almost captive in this house. Between the kids and Trey's almost insane jealousy, I rarely go outside. I frowned but didn't say anything. What do you have for me? She sat down on a folding chair opposite me, which was against the wall. I sat down and opened my folder. He took out the top bag of documents and laid them out on the table. Trey has almost $22 million spread across 7 different accounts in 4 countries and 4 banks. I found passwords and logins for each of them. Her eyes widened, and I saw a hint of anger pass through them. Can you get them? I grinned. I can't. But you can. She looked a little puzzled. Why can't you do it? Well, strictly speaking, I could, but it would be illegal. If you do this as his wife, you have every right to transfer the money legally. In terms of revenge, wouldn't it be much more satisfying if you did it yourself? Sissy began to speak, but then I heard another voice and almost jumped on the spot. I was sitting with my back to the door, which was not at all like me, and when I realized this, I was surprised. I turned around sharply, jumping up from my chair in a defensive posture. Daniel stood in the doorway. He raised his hands in front of him, indicating that he meant no harm and had no obvious intentions. I relaxed. Of course, she wants to do it herself. He entered the room, and we shook hands. He turned his chair around and sat down. I noticed that he chose the side of the table from which the exit was visible. I was a little ashamed that I was caught off guard. Once Sissy transfers the money to a safe place, what do you recommend doing next? Find a lawyer. Start preparing documents and putting your affairs in order on the spot. It will be done today. If you need help setting up offshore accounts, I can do it. I don't know enough about Cece's situation with her house, cars, and personal belongings to be helpful. Your lawyer will be able to help you with this better than I can. I must warn you, everything I've been told indicates that this will be a dirty fight. Be prepared for this. Cece was serious. Daniel looked at Rick again. Rick wasn't sure what was going on. I'd like to coordinate with you as this unfolds in a couple of weeks. Let me be clear, I used Marcy's power of attorney to sell the house. Her car and my car were leased through my former company. When I sold my interest in the LLC, I asked them to cancel the lease and take the cars back. According to the documents, she earns more than me, so child support should not be an issue. She may have a claim on my military pension, but since I'm unemployed, I'm hoping the judge will see how different the circumstances are and leave the pension to me. Daniel looked at me with a knowing smile. I'm pretty sure you have another plan. Of course, I will inform you about anything that could affect Cece before it happens. But it might be better not to talk about some things. Daniel nodded. Cece just stood there, her head turning from side to side, while Daniel and I talked. Finally, she intervened. What's wrong with you guys? I can hear the words and seem to understand the meaning, but I don't think I'm getting all the information being discussed here. I chuckled and Daniel put his arm around his daughter's shoulders. Don't worry. Men who share a common experience can say a lot using very few words. I guess. I took the opportunity to politely walk away from the situation. I need to go back to the office. Get your affairs in order. I'll contact you a week before this all comes to a head so we can make sure everyone is on the same page. If you hear or find out anything, please let me know. You both have my phone number. Cece nodded and Daniel removed his hand from her shoulder and walked me to the front door. He came out and put his hand on my shoulder. Thank you for taking my daughter into account. I know I didn't have to, but it means a lot to me. She's a strong woman, but you understand the emotions she's dealing with on top of everything else. Daniel, I don't want there to be any more collateral damage than necessary. Backlash is inevitable, and you understand it. I know you have the ability to protect Cece from some blows. I just don't want her to end up the loser, especially with 3 kids. You're a good person, Rick. I would have been glad to have you on my command staff when the mess started. But knowing you were watching over us from above was a comfort at the time, even if I didn't know you personally back then. How many missions did you fly during that mission? I chuckled. 1 more than it should be. Some of your guys from the front ambush were fighting their way back to the camp. They were almost surrounded when my partner and I showed up. In 20 minutes, we had used up most of our weapons. This gave your guys a chance to get out of range and away from the enemy. As we turned to follow them, My partner took an RPG from the ridge. Their helicopter crashed and caught fire. I went down, hovering over the crashed plane to see if anyone had gotten out while we watered what we had left along that ridge. None of the crew seemed to get out. And then another RPG exploded right under the plane, right under my seat. These buckets under the seats are made of titanium. It hurt like hell, but I was busy. I later found out that I had a bunch of shrapnel in my butt, thighs, and feet. The ground effect rocked the helicopter. We had problems maintaining altitude. We flew about 6 kilometers more, and the plane simply broke down. I managed to make an auto landing, from which we all got out. We spotted a couple technical vehicles heading towards us up the valley. Things got pretty tense after that. We managed to organize a fairly fierce defense. My flight mechanic took a bullet in the soft part of his leg. He held on, but was bleeding heavily. Then some bastard came within firing range of an RPG and started showering us with explosions. We are in very deep shit. My co-pilot received shrapnel in the face, which put him out of action. I tried to stay on 3 sides, but I had problems with the ammo. I had very bad thoughts. Then I saw 4 Hummers speeding down the road like they were racing. The ragheads, as befits them, hastily retreated back into the mountains and along the road. We hitched a ride with your guys, the same ones we covered earlier. They saw the first helicopter go down and began to return. Daniel listened carefully to Rick's story. He was silent for a while. We lost half a dozen men trying to get back down this valley. We would have lost everyone if it weren't for you and your partner. I'm sorry they didn't come back. I nodded, holding back tears from the memories. Daniel gave me time to compose myself before he spoke again. I also remember your commander calling me and asking what the hell happened. All he seemed to know was that 2 of his planes had been shot down and only 1 crew had returned. I sent him copies of post-operative reports from all officers involved. I later learned that someone had received the Distinguished Service Cross. Was it you? Yes, but I didn't deserve it. Chappie deserved it. He was my flight mechanic. He lost the lower part of his leg. My co-pilot, Benny, lost sight in one eye, and that was the end of his flying career. Both of these guys deserve this medal much more than I do. All I did was get a bunch of shrapnel in my ass and wear a pillow for the next 2 months to sit on. Daniel squeezed my shoulder, and I noticed something new in his eyes. Go home, have a drink, rest. You know, just like I do, that you deserve this medal. Accept it with honor. I'll contact you in a few days. I nodded and climbed into my beat-up old 4-wheel drive truck. I went to the condominium to follow Daniel's advice. Tomorrow will be D-Day -7, 1 week until the plane from Colombia was scheduled to land. I still haven't heard from Marcy since I called the hotel and got through to Penny. This fact did not ease my pain at all. In fact, it was another slap in the face and gave me more confidence that I was right. She planned it all and was ready for the end of our marriage. I continued my plans and preparations. My lawyer prepared all the necessary documents for divorce. I decided to serve her with a subpoena right at the airport. I wanted all her companions and colleagues to know exactly what was going on. In addition to the divorce package, Cardoza will also be sued for alienation of affection. My lawyer warned me not to expect much, but it would be a public stab in the eye. Packages of evidence, recordings, videos, photographs, and emails were placed on flash drives. A letter explaining my actions and demands has been prepared. These flash drives will be delivered to the hospital, Doctors Without Borders office, and the Medical Licensing Board on Monday morning when the plane lands. Slightly modified packages would be delivered to the husbands of each woman Cardoza lured into a relationship, 18 packages in total. There would be more, but some of them are already divorced. The Doctors Without Borders Board of Directors will also receive an information package. The same financial data has already been submitted to the FBI, and it is my understanding that a warrant is to be served on Cardoza upon arrival for fraud, grand theft, and tax evasion. The FBI had already visited his home, and Cease almost happily handed over all his records, laptop, and cell phone to them. The hospital will also receive its share of attention. We sued them for breach of contract because they didn't follow their fraternization rules. I'm pretty sure someone in senior management knew what was going on. My lawyer doesn't think the case will go to trial. He predicts a quick settlement to protect the hospital's reputation. I don't care. Fuck them all. As for me, I arranged everything so that I could leave the city immediately after the first strike began. I wanted to be there to see their shock when they were handed the summons at the airport. Oh, did I forget to mention that the source was ready to leak everything to the press the night before? I fully expected there to be a lot of reporting, video cameras, and maybe even a few interested spectators. I received a text message from Marcy that she would be flying in on Monday, but not going home straight away. She was going to spend the night with the ambassador at the airport to rest and recuperate. She asked me to pick her up on Tuesday morning. My lawyer called and said everything was ready. The FBI contacted me to make sure everything went according to plan. I told him then that my plan was to leave town on Monday right after the show ended. I gave him my new phone number and told him I'd be in touch, but I wasn't sure where I was going. He said he understood. Later that evening, I used a burner phone. My first call was to Rhonda, our daughter. She knew about the situation with her mother. I deliberately didn't talk to her for several weeks. Now I felt that the time had come. Dad, where the hell have you been? Kyle and I searched everywhere looking for you. I'm fine. I had a lot on my mind and a lot of decisions to make. I didn't want to get you and Kyle involved in this mess. What the hell is going on with Mom? I can't contact her either. Is she still in Colombia? Yes, she should be back in a couple of days. I want you to understand that your mother was a good example for you until the last few months. She decided to forget her wedding vows and take a lover. They had been living together for the past 6 weeks in Colombia. That damn Dr. Cardoza, I knew he was trouble. The way she looked and the way her voice sounded when she talked about him told me everything I needed to know. I'm so sorry, Dad. What are you going to do? First, I want you and Kyle to stay in touch with your mother. She will need a lot of support over the next few weeks and maybe longer. She has been a good mother to you for most of your life. Help her wherever you feel capable and comfortable. Dad, what are you going to do? Are you going to jail? No, Rhonda. I'm not planning anything like that. I'm going to completely ruin their lives and probably many others in the process. Suffice it to say that when everything is settled, your mother will be almost destitute, homeless, and friendless. You will receive a lot of information in the next few days. You will need to make your own decisions about how to deal with your mother. What about you? I'm going to take time for myself. This was incredibly difficult for me. I need to understand myself and decide how I want to rebuild my life. You're leaving, aren't you? Yes. Can we find out where you're going? Over time. When I decide, I'll let you know. Dad, I don't want to lose you too. Please stay in touch. When I figure myself out, I'll let you know. If an emergency arises, please contact my attorney. Okay, Dad, I love you. I love you too, Princess. I immediately dialed my son's number. The conversation was much the same, but he was much more hateful towards his mother. I tried to convince him to stay in touch with her, but after I hung up, I had the distinct feeling that he was going to cut her out of his life. There was nothing more I could do at that moment. I called Cease and Daniel. Cease invited me to dinner. I arrived around 6 p.m. Daniel was already there. I was sure that Daniel was spending a lot of time at Cease's house with these kids. It was good. They will need a lot of good male support in the next few months. Cease cooked Italian food. A huge pot of spaghetti and marinara sauce, a big salad, appetizers, and bread. She was a good cook. We all sat down at the large dining table. Even the children sat with us. The spaghetti was a huge hit, but I think as much ended up on the floor and table as it did in 3 little hungry mouths. The 3 adults chatted quietly, but spent most of the time watching and listening to the children chattering and giggling. Consuela took the children for a bath and put them to bed. When everyone was upstairs and tucked away, 3 of us retired to the office. Daniel didn't waste any time. How are your plans going? Everything is ready. Most of it is already running its course, and I don't need to do anything. I'll have to make some calls Monday morning, but right now it's just a waiting game. How are your preparations going? Sissy answered this question. Everything that you and our lawyers suggested was done. Starting Monday morning, he won't have much to look forward to. The judge reluctantly issued a temporary restraining order because Trey was not there and no apparent threats had been made. However, Dad has arranged for a private security guard to be here starting Monday and stay until I feel safe. All money transfers have been completed. Daniel replied with a grin on his face. Trey will be served with a summons at the airport. I think around the same time your wife gets it. I'm sure it will be an interesting morning for him. Even more interesting than you think. I told them about the FBI. I expected Sissy to react differently. Will he be arrested? I wouldn't be surprised. The FBI doesn't let me in on all of its business, but my lawyer said the FBI would wait until all civil service was completed. They didn't want the bailiffs to get caught in the middle of a trial with Trey. Daniel chuckled. Serves him right, this bastard. What will you do while all this is happening? Damn it. I wouldn't miss this show for the world. I'll be at the airport. Daniel laughed loudly. Understand? Yes, I want to see this in person. I'm leaving right after the show at the airport. I gave up renting an apartment and packed everything I wanted to take with me. I saw the shock on their faces. Cece's eyes filled with tears, and she slowly shook her head from side to side. I realized it was time to leave. I still have a lot to do today. Tomorrow morning, I will move out of the apartment and spend the last 2 nights in a hotel. My phone will be hot until Monday afternoon if something unexpected happens. I will love and cherish you both. Daniel, you're almost like a brother to me. Cece, you are beautiful and loving. You are the mother I would like my wife to be. You will succeed. I turned and walked away, leaving them to sit in stunned silence as I gently closed the front door and walked towards my old truck. I spent the day going through my things again. There weren't many of them. I threw most of the clothes into donation containers. I didn't have any furniture. I kept all the kitchen supplies I had saved for the new tenants. They could use them or throw them away as they pleased. Everything I needed or wanted fit comfortably in the back seat of the 3-year-old Chevy Silverado sitting in the driveway. I bought it a few days ago, and the dealer delivered it this morning. I didn't even look back at the apartment. I had a duffel bag with everything I would need for the next 2 days. I checked into the Ambassador at the airport. I thought this was quite fair. I threw my laptop and bag on the bed and immediately headed to the bar. I was about to do something I had been avoiding throughout this entire ordeal. I was going to drink myself to death. I woke up the next morning with a bad hangover. I took a long, hot shower, drank several large glasses of water from the mini fridge, and went down to the restaurant. I checked my old phone. There were still no calls or messages. I shrugged, pulled the SIM card out of the phone, and broke it in half. Each half went into different trash containers in the lobby. I threw the phone itself into another trash can next to the restaurant. I ordered a large portion of carbohydrate food and slowly enjoyed it. I was free for the rest of the day. I decided not to go to the bar again this evening as I was planning to hit the road by noon and wanted to be clear-headed. I spent that day watching John Wayne movies on the TV in my room. My temporary cell phone rang. I responded immediately, fearing that something had gone wrong and thrown off my schedule. It was Daniel. Rick, can we meet and talk? Certainly. Have a problem. I told him where I was, and an hour later he arrived. We met downstairs and ended up at the bar, sipping cold beer. I had no idea what was on his mind. When I heard his first few sentences, I almost fell out of my chair. Sissy is in mourning. It seems the realization of the impending end of her marriage has finally caught up with her. I never saw her cry or suffer while we were doing this. Jesus, you're a stupid martinet. I was shocked. Why do you say that? He shook his head. She's in love with you. I struggled to stay on the bar stool, stunned. When I didn't say anything, Daniel continued. She's in love with you, and I think she assumed you had feelings for her. Now she feels betrayed and lost. She cried all evening after your speech before leaving. I suddenly realized that this was not a good situation, and I needed to do something to diffuse the situation. Daniel, I'm sorry. I never wanted to deceive her or give her false ideas about my feelings. God, she's young enough to be my daughter. I'm almost the same age as you. She needs a good man who will be the father of her children and grow old with her. She certainly doesn't need someone like me as a husband. I don't think I'm ready for a new relationship, especially with children. Cease is a beautiful young woman, a great mother, and very much like her father. Daniel drank half his beer and looked at me across the table. I wasn't sure if he was going to drag me across the table or just stare at me like a laser. Finally, he spoke in a very reserved and soft voice. I thought it was so. I knew that coming out of this situation, you would most likely be cautious about any relationships. I also know that you are a decent and moral person. I just wanted you to know how she feels. I also wanted to hear your feelings. I still consider you a friend and comrade. I'm not worried about Sissy. As soon as this is all over, she will sell this monster of a house and move in with me. It will be great to have grandchildren nearby. Consuelo will come with her, so everything will be as normal as we can make it. Rick, when you have dealt with your demons, please come see us or let us know that you are okay and alive. You are a good person. I'm proud to know you and can't thank you enough for your help. Daniel stood up, finished his beer, and extended his hand. We shook hands firmly and stood there for several seconds. I think I got the best of it, but wasn't sure. He smiled and left without a word. I finished my beer, grabbed a sandwich from the snack bar, and headed back to my room. I got up early, took a shower, and packed the few things I had in my hotel room. I went down to the lobby, paid all the bills from the mini fridge, and headed out to my truck. I could leave it in the hotel parking lot for free. The travel bag went into the back seat, and I locked the doors. The airport bus took me straight to the baggage claim area. There were still a few hours left before the plane arrived. I found a small table in the food area near baggage claim and sat down there. I heard over the public address system that the flight from Colombia had arrived. Show time. I walked down towards the baggage claim area and found a spot from where I could watch arriving passengers entering through the doors from the secure part of the terminal. I was sitting in a row of those damn airport seats, but behind plastic vegetation. About 20 minutes later, I saw the first members of Doctors Without Borders from Colombia coming through the doors. Almost all of them were couples. I recognized a few people and realized that none of them were there for their own spouses. This whole trip must have been nothing more than a huge adulterer's party. Finally, I saw Marcy and Cardoza coming through the doors. He was tanned and smiling. Marcy hung on him like a leech. He turned once to hug her. What I saw was his eyes looking at a tall blonde woman in her early 20s walking by. He was searching again. When they broke the hug, I saw a young man in a nice business suit approach them. The young woman stood a few steps behind. I was close enough to hear the conversation. Dr. Trey Cardoza and Mrs. Marcy Weston. Both answered in the affirmative. The young man smiled, reached into his jacket pocket, and took out 2 envelopes. He handed one to each of them. You have been handed the documents. A flash of light from the young woman's camera was proof of the award. I could hardly contain my laughter at their reactions. Both immediately made movements similar to fish thrown out of water. Trey was the first to come to his senses and opened the envelope. His eyes went from classy to focused to furious. Son of a damn bitch. Your damn husband is suing me for alienation of affection. I thought you sorted that out before you left. Marcy didn't listen. She just looked at the divorce papers. It was clear that the divorce papers did not come as a surprise to her. She took a deep breath and looked around, sneaking documents into her purse. Her hurried glances at the others in the group told me that she didn't want any of them to realize what was happening. Neither of them had a chance to recover when another woman approached. She looked at Trey. Dr. Trey Cardoza. Yes, what the hell do you need? The woman handed him another envelope and answered with the same phrase. You have been handed the documents. She quickly stepped back and disappeared into the crowd. Trey tore open the envelope and looked at his own divorce papers. He seemed deflated. The tan on his face was almost gone, replaced by a sick green tint. He groaned and walked away. Marcy hurried after him. Trey, wait, where are you going? Home. I need to deal with this and rein in my wife. But what about me? What about you? You have your own problems. I advise you to deal with them yourself. We're done. Don't call me or write to me. Then he smiled a thin, mocking smile, almost a grin. It was fun, you're cool, but it's over. He turned, completely forgetting about his luggage, and headed towards the taxi waiting area. Marcy looked at his back, her mouth open, and the papers dangled in her hands. It was almost painful to watch if I didn't despise her so much. I heard a noise outside and headed towards a door somewhere down the hall. When I finally came back into view, I saw the FBI agents leaning over the figure on the ground. I saw Marcy coming out the door with her bags. She saw her former lover lying face down on the ground, handcuffed. She screamed and started towards him, but one of the FBI agents intercepted her. She tried to push him away, and when he stopped her, she punched him. The blow never landed, but she ended up face down on the concrete. The handcuffs latched onto her wrists with a distinctive click. I stayed to watch as they were both bundled into an FBI van and driven away. I noticed that the rest of the Doctors Without Borders group was nowhere to be seen. I took a deep breath, turned around, and started looking for a shuttle to the hotel. I was 800 miles from what had once been my home. I wasn't going anywhere in particular, just away. Since my old phone was in pieces somewhere, and no one except my lawyer and Daniel knew my new number, my phone was silent. I got rid of the laptop by splitting it into several pieces, throwing them into various trash cans, lakes, and rivers as I went through the first few days. Everything on it was carefully stored in cloud storage owned by my ex-partner. It was in good hands and where no one could get to it. I avoided interstates and most major highways. I wasn't really worried about law enforcement finding me. I didn't think Trey or Marcy would have the chance to find me. I looked along the highway into the distance and smiled. Texas. I've never served in Texas, but I've always wanted to visit. One of my historical heroes once said, "You can all go to hell, but I'll go to Texas." Subscribe to our channel so that your love doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think, click to the next one. Click to the next one. Click to the next one. Click to the next